My first experience with music, actually listening to anything in the underground realm was at school, and it was the early 80s, and someone had a ghetto blaster, and there it was, Grandmaster Flash, I think it was The Message, and that was the first ever hip hop tune I'd ever heard. And I was absolutely blown away. That just totally blew my mind. I was like, wow, this just totally beats everything that I've ever heard. Coming, rattling out that radio, all this pop music and stuff like that. And then I heard, this, The Message, and it was like, and then the next time I listened to it, I listened to the lyrics, and I thought that's really deep as well. From that sort of first introduction to hip hop scene, from listening to that Grandmaster Flash song, and then I wanted to hear more. Just sort of on my travels as a little kid, I walked through the subways and stuff, and there's guys, Lino, all there in a big circle breakdancing, and the tunes are playing. I'm like, right, I want to get into this. And I was like, and that's when I really got interested in breakdancing. And I was asking some people, what's the music playing? That stuff's amazing. So anyway, the guy said, this is Street Sounds Electro 1. And I was like, right, I need to get that. So I had to go and get that, and my brother had a copy of that. He had a copy of that and Electro 2. But he wasn't really interested in them. He was like more into Hawkwind and Pink Floyd and a lot of sort of early blues and stuff like that. He was really into sort of, more going towards the acoustic stuff. I was really into this sort of electronic sort of sound, But my brother did bring home a couple of synthesizers, and he had an MS-10, a Korg MS-10. I mean, that might not mean anything to a lot of people, but for those who know, that'll mean a hell of a lot. He had an SH-101, and he just kept bringing home these synthesizers. Now, in the 80s, everybody at that point, it was sort of mid-80s going on towards the late 80s by then, and he basically bought these synthesizers for next to nothing. He had a TB303 and a 606, and I think he paid about 20 quid for the pair. It's £20, that's like, about $30 in American money. Those things you could just pick up for dirt cheap. Everybody was just clearing them out. What do I want these big analog monsters for? There's this digital synth, there's this D50 that's just come out, and there's Korg M1, these do everything, they haven't got loads of dials and switches all over them, they're clean, let's get this, nice clean synth. So everybody was selling up their analog gear, and for nothing, you'd see like analog studio clear out, and they'd just be clearing out all this analog stuff for buttons. A few years building this sort of slowly. I think this was the first module that I built, and it's all handwritten on. Or was it this one? There's a Korg Delta VCF, there's two of those. That's a filter, it's a clone of the ARP 2600, the early model. There's various other things. There's a filter here that I've just built myself. This was all. You can vary certain components if you don't like the way that the controls coming in. If you think, well, that's ramping up a bit too fast, you can actually change that, which is something you can't do in a digital realm, because once it's been programmed to be that's it. You can't ever. I could take that out, swap a few components, make it sound completely different. The first job I had when I left school was in a music shop, and it was called Music Village. It was in Peterborough, and then they opened up what they called the MIDI booth, and then they opened up another branch in Cambridge, and they called it Digital Village because it was Music Village, so I was sort of working in the company that was before Digital Village, which is like a really big company in the UK for buying music gear. And I remember the boss came down the stairs one day, and he had this MS-20, this Korg MS-20 mono analogue synthesizer, and in his hand, and he said, "Do you want to buy that?" And he said, "Can't sell it." He said, "I've got a whole load of them upstairs." He said, "Do you want to buy this?" And I said, "How much?" And he went, £50. And I was like, I was on a really low wage, and I was like, I'm going to have to miss that because I just can't afford it, So I could have really scraped by and sort of, lived on beans on toast for the rest of the month. But, I thought, I really wanted it. And then he come down the stairs a bit later. He sort of took that up, come back down the stairs with the Korg MS-10. He said, "Well, what about this one?" I said, "Well, how much do you want for that?" And he went, 20. And I was like, I really want it, but I can't afford it. So off he went up the stairs. So £70, and I could have had both of those. And that's like, the pair would go for about 3,000 now. Yeah, this is called Prophecy. I picked this one up really cheap because it was on eBay and someone couldn't test it because it didn't have a power cable. So I was expecting loads of faults with it. Got it in, got it home, plugged it in, and it worked. So because of that, I was raring to take the thing. I was quite disappointed that it did work because I wanted to fix it, So when it worked, I thought, well, I'm going to take it to pieces anyway. So I took it to pieces and swapped out the LEDs. And now I've got all blue LEDs in its place as well. So yeah. So anyway, that's that. This one's a Juno 1. My first synth that I bought was a Juno 2, but I sold that or swapped it with somebody, and the next, I sort of missed it, so I got a Juno 1 because one came available in the early 90s, so I picked that up just to replace it because it's an awesome little synth. Very underrated, and because it hasn't got all the sliders. If that had all the sliders like a Jupiter 8, people would be spending thousands on the things, but it doesn't. So, but it's still got the sound engine inside it. It's still got a nice analog filter and everything, analog chorus. Sounds really nice. The first time I actually wrote any music of my own, apart from playing with different chord progressions that I did when I was really young. The first time I actually wrote music was at school, because at school we had, you could do art or music, and you couldn't get on a music course, but we had, I think, 4 weeks of music in my entire time at school. That was it. And they put us in these little booths, and they give us these little Yamaha keyboards, and which had built-in drums, and we paired up, boy and a girl. The girl did the vocals, the boy did the sort of messed about on the keyboards and that. I got paired off with this girl, and we sat in there, and I put some beats on out of this synthesizer, and then I was just sort of playing some chords, and then she started singing on it. But the beats that I was putting together, because I had all the hip-hop influence, because I loved hip-hop, so all I was interested in doing is making hip-hop with this synthesizer. So I was making these hip-hop beats, playing the odd chords, and then she was doing these really soulful vocals. Although we were little kids, we made what is now R&B, but before R&B was what it is now, but we were doing that style of music, When I was really young, before I got my hands on a computer, when I was at school again, I couldn't afford decks, so I did get decks in the end, but I built my own mixer, because I'm really into electronics as well. I've got some crazy little hobbies when I was a little kid. I was into astronomy, electronics, anything nerdy. But it wasn't cool to be nerdy back then. That was the thing, So I was like, why am I into all this stuff? Couldn't I just be normal? But So yeah. Going back to the composition, I did that composition. It was quite. They were quite surprised at the results. They didn't believe it was me. Because they played all these tunes. They left mine till the end. And they were like, and when they played it back to the class, they all, "Who do you think wrote this one?" And all the kids were pointing at the coolest kids in the class. Those two have got to have done that tune. Those two, because they're the coolest kids. And it was like the little nerd that had done, This one here, you'll see, every component is just absolutely spot on. You know, but then I was, you know, my first job doing electronics, you know, because I've done music, working in music shops and electronics, because I enjoy both. So my first electronics job was I was building avionics, which is radio, aircraft radio communications, and so I learned all my skills there and my soldering skills. So you know, it looks pretty much machine done, but I'm really sort of fussy about the way that I solder. You know, but that's not finished yet. I just need to place the chips, put the cables in, and make the front panel design and stuff like that. That'll measure ESR on a capacitor, that'll measure LCR, that's the LCR. This is your standard meter, and if you're wondering why I got two, so you can measure voltage and amps at the same time, so because you need two meters for that. And there will be various things. This one's got a frequency counter, this is transistors, and this is all surface mount components. So if I take, for example, let's find this is the next one I'm going to work on actually. So just have a look how fine the pictures of the chip goes on there, and yeah, that sits in there. And I've got to hand solder that. People seem to think that I'm absolutely loaded, but you know, I'm not, you know, massively wealthy. I just sort of have what I have. I've built it up over the years, and so this is actually part of my bedroom. So you know, I'd love to have a separate workshop. You know, have a proper separate workshop, because I've got all this gear, all the cabinets and everything like that dotted around, and you know, my components. I'd love to have all of that. I've got tools in the cupboard. I've got my decks here. I've got the tools in the cupboard underneath, under the bench. I also repair synthesizers. That's a little sideline. And so I have to clear everything off when I'm repairing synths and stuff, so which is pretty crap. So these are all through-hole resistors, so that's basically those boards. And then the other boards, the newer ones that I'm going to be building, they take these surface mount. These are 3 different size, same value, they're all 1 kilo ohm. When I first started getting gear, the first thing I got was an Amiga computer. I had left school and this was after working in a music shop. I worked for Commodore, and I got my hands on one of the Commodore Amigas. I had a Commodore 64 before that. You could write music on it, but it was very much like the chiptune stuff, you know, that chiptune sound. So you couldn't really sort of do beats and, you know, real sort of heavy beats and stuff, you know, sampling break beats and stuff like that. You couldn't do it. But yeah, I got my hands on an Amiga. And then I was really messing about with the beats because it was really good for that. So I was writing music to what I had access to, rather than writing it because I wanted to write that particular genre. The genre wasn't important. What was important was I was going to get the best that I could out of that piece of gear. I had loads of old hip hop records, so I just sat there sampling all these break beats, chopping up the beats and the snare drums and making individual beats, putting bass lines in. It was very basic, you know. These trackers were like 4 channels, so you had your breakbeat, your bass line. You couldn't really put a chord in unless you sort of dropped out one of the others, or if you're going to do it, put the notes in between the notes of the bass line. So you know, you had to be really creative with the limitations that you had. I basically got for, you know, really cheap, because everybody was buying digital desks and selling the analogue ones out, so all the studios were clearing out, and so I bought them. They were really famous in acid house days, these actual desks. They were the hot desks to have down south, you know. And then next up, I've got a few keyboards here. And yes, I also like digital synths, although you know, I love my analog stuff, but digital's got its own thing as well, which both of them do different things. They're very good for, yeah, they have a very different sound, and I wouldn't say anyone's better or worse, they just do different things. I know you get these analogue heads and like, oh, digital's crap. Well, actually, no, it isn't. Digital's pretty bloody awesome. But so is analogue. You know, they're both good. So I like both, and I use whatever in my music. Yeah. So basically, what I did with the tunes that I'd made on the Amiga, I was messing about with breakbeats and bass lines and stuff like that. And at the time, the rave scene was emerging. It was early 90s. We're talking 89, 90. And my first experience in a club. I used to go to a club called Techno Dream. And that was when I first heard Derek May, Strings of Life. All of those tunes were all brand new. You know, they were all just sort of coming out and emerging out of the scene. And I was like, these tunes are amazing. Wow, you know, there's actually some really good stuff here. I loved my electro from my youth, you know, the street sounds thing and all of that. I loved all of that, but this was something else. This was like they'd taken electro to a new level, you know. And it was in a club, so you had the bass lines, you know, you don't get out of the ghetto blasters, you know. Yeah, you can hear the sort of the drum beats and stuff, but it didn't rumble through your body like it does in a nightclub, you know. So anyway, I was like totally blown away by the music there. But then on the other hand, they also played some crap, you know, and it was like, do you know what, I could do better than that, you know. And I thought, well, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and start writing some music. And that's when I was playing about with the Amiga at that point in time. And I gave them a tape. I went into, because back then they had like the decks and they had a tape deck. They always had a tape deck. You know, this is before we had CDJs and all of that, you know, CD decks and, you know, laptops and stuff. There's none of that, you know, it hadn't even been invented. So, you know, old Technics decks and a tape deck and a mixing disc. So I bought a tape in and I said to the DJ, because, you know, I got sort of really friendly with him because I was interested in music and I was asking, what's this tune, you know. I gave him a tape of the stuff that I'd done on the Amiga. I said, would you mind playing that? You know, would you play that? Because, you know, I've just made this track. And so, yeah, he played it in a club and it went down really well. And I was like watching all these people dancing to my tune. I wasn't interested in dancing. I was just like watching. I was like, I did that, you know. And I was really young. I was like 17 years old. You know, I wasn't even old enough to go to the club at that point. I was like amazed that people were actually dancing to this, me messing about on the Amiga in my bedroom, you know. I was amazed like that it was, you know, to see that. So I just kept on writing because that really gave me a massive confidence boost. And then I sent some stuff off to a couple of labels, and now I think there was 3 labels that I sent off to. This was a few years after that. So I sent some stuff off to. There was Moving Shadow, XL Recordings, and the Prodigy had only just been signed to them at that point. Prodigy, they used to come to Peterborough as well. There was quite a few artists we all used to hang about together in this place called Miss Pears. And now Liam Howlett from Prodigy and a couple of those guys. There was a guy called Casey Tucker, who's an old friend. He got signed to Plus 8 Records. He was the first British artist to be on Plus 8 Records in Detroit, Richie Hawtin's label, and he went under the name VFT, Variable Frequency Technician. He also did another release which was 0733, which was the dialing code for Peterborough at the time. There were a few others. There was a group called Shades of Rhythm who are still doing gigs now, doing old school stuff. They were, you know, so every week we'd all meet up, you know, we'd all be in Miss Pears and, you know, sit there on the front with a cappuccino and sort of chatting away and, you know, and just sort of, you know, watching the world go by on a Saturday afternoon. You know, everyone's off work and chilling out, and you know, there's all these musicians. But yeah, that was a nice scene. I met these guys, and we came up with the name Brainstorm, but Brainstorm had been used, so we said Brainstorm Crew, and we sent some stuff off. It was my stuff, but we formed a group because they were sort of like acting as management. And they were also organising events, gigs and everything like that. And I thought, well, we're a crew, you know. I might be the one that writes the music, but we're all a crew here. We're all doing something to sort of benefit this you know, this outfit here. I was writing some stuff with those guys. Well, I was writing the stuff for myself, but you know, we were sort of giving them, because my mate, they had sound systems and everything like that. So you know, I was the artist out of the crew, and yeah, we sent some stuff off to these 3 labels: Moving Shadow, XL, and Formation Records. I didn't hear anything back from 2 of them, but Formation Records came back, and they were like, "We're really feeling this music. We're loving what you're doing, like, you know." And I was like, "Wow, you know, a record label's interested." You know, so I was like, you know, it's quite an achievement. You know, I was still a teenager then. You know, so anyway, so we released our first major release. We had a few white labels out before that, but you know, for actual major release was this very pink sleeve Brainstorm Crew, the plastic EP, and it was actually, there's a little story behind the title of that track. We used to have in the early days of the rave scene, there was most of the people that would go out were really into the music. But as time went on, more and more people came into the scene just because it was cool, and they were, you know, they were like, some people call them fakes, and I used to call them plastic ravers, you know. And I got this sample from a Yaz. It was at the end of a Yaz record. I think it was The Only Way Is Up, and at the end of that it says Yaz and the Plastic Population. At the end it goes, "Ha ha ha, you'll see the plastic men are coming, ha 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 ha," blah blah blah. That was a sample, and at the time there's very few what were called Toy Town tunes. Like at the time there was Charlie Says and tunes like that were the early what they were called Toy Town tunes. And you know, and I thought, well, I'm going to make one of these funny tunes, and I thought I'll make one about the ravers, about these plastic ravers, you know. And I really wanted to sort of keep pushing that, but they were more interested in the financial side, which wasn't getting back as much as was going into it at the time, but it was picking up. It was so slow for them; they wanted to be overnight millionaires, you know. So it didn't happen like that, you know. That's, you know, the Prodigy was never, you know, a millionaire when he started. He had real basic gear, you know, couldn't afford a great deal of stuff, you know. We pretty much had the same setup at the beginning, you know. And there's the rack, there's a few synth modules in there, mostly digital stuff. In fact, it's all digital stuff. There's a little Nord modular, these are MIDI interfaces, a DAT player, recorder. And then there's synth modules, drum machines and bits and pieces. So after Formation Records disbanded, I actually went back to it. I was working with various other artists. I've been doing various different music with different artists. And one of my old friends, this guy Matthew Hurst, who I used to hang about with, we were really into electronics and stuff. But anyway, we did some music before I met the Brainstorm crew. We were Digital Chaos. And then after they split up, I was like, I want to make some more music with Matthew, because that was fun, you know. This thing was all sort of got too much about the money and stuff. And although, yeah, it was a nice sort of feeling to have your own record out and stuff, you know, to have your music on vinyl, it was a really nice feeling there. But it was going on towards too much about the money rather than the music. And I was like, well, yeah, you know, the money is nice because I can buy synthesizers, you know, and that's when I first started buying gear. So I went back and just did a bit more work with Matthew, and we took a sample off an old Street Sounds record, and it said, "Only the truly wise ones will conquer the power of darkness." And at the time, it was just after the rave, initial breakbeat hardcore rave scene. It was at the time when jungle techno, because it was like between techno and then like breakbeat in the techno was making the jungle techno. This was before drum and bass had been invented. So when I was on Formation, it wasn't drum and bass. It was not a drum and bass label. It was that label was there before drum and bass, you know, before the term was coined, you know. After I disbanded from Brainstorm crew, I went back and worked with this guy Matthew, and we did a release and we sampled that wise one, that only the truly wise ones, and we called ourselves the Wise Ones, and it was on a subsidiary of Formation, because I sent some stuff off to DJSS, who run the label, and I said, "Oh, you're interested in that?" He's like, yeah. He says, "We want some more stuff for our F project." I was like, "Yeah," because the F project stuff was more experimental. It was like, and a lot of people say that the stuff on F project now is a lot better than was on the main label, because people were experimenting a bit more, and it was a bit darker as well. And at that point, 1993, the whole scene had gone underground because of the 1991-92. It went really cheesy, piano tunes everywhere, and it was all overly happy, and it just became a little bit too much. So the real ravers, the people that were really into the scene, took it underground by making the music darker, and the music got a lot darker, and it was speeding up. The music sped up basically because of the DJs. The DJs would play all their mixes, they'd have the decks on +2, so the music was always faster and more energetic for the crowd. So the producers would get these tapes, "Oh, this is the speed of the music now, so we'll have to catch up." So the producers were doing a few BPMs faster each sort of time they do a piece of music. The following month, the DJ's playing the stuff on +2, playing the stuff that had been sped up by the producer on +2. So gradually, the music sped up to what drum and bass is now. And that's how drum and bass got so fast, and that's why it didn't just sort of happen bang. You listen to early music, and then if you listen to stuff at the beginning of 1992 and you listen to stuff at the end of 1992, you won't be able to mix the two records, because the speed, the early stuff's a lot slower than the later stuff. And this one is the Moog Little Fatty, which is again, this is one of those synths. It's an analogue synth. Or it's got an analogue signal path, but it's the whole control side of that synth is digital. So you've got these analogue heads. Oh yeah, well, why don't you get one of these little fatties because it's analogue, and the analogue's best. Well, actually, a lot of it's digital. So if you've got an analogue synth with a MIDI socket on the back, it's not analogue. So the music sped up, and we did the Wise Ones EP, and it was quite a dark piece of music. Both sides one side was quite had a lot of feelings, and we just called it Feelings. The other side was Wise Ones, and we called it Power of Darkness, though nobody knew the titles at the time because they were white labels. Well, they were labels because it just said F Project on the back. I mean, there's one down here that I've got, and all you'd get from Wise Ones, loads of stuff that I've released. I've got piles of stuff that I've released over the years, but so you'd get the name of the label F Project, and then the artist Wise Ones, and all of the artists were also artists that were on the main label but used different names. It's like the studio engineer, his name was Mark Yorath, and he called himself EQ on Formation, but on the subsidiary label, the F Project, he was going out as Dark Mark and various other names, so the O, and he had various names that he was using. So, but that was all you got, So I kept writing, but I was pretty much out of the loop. A lot of the clubs in where I lived had closed down. The big rave scene had happened, it had gone underground again, and the club promoters weren't making half the money that they were, so they all packed up and quit while they were ahead, so to speak. So they all sort of wrapped up these clubs, so there was no underground music in the city where I was. There was very little underground music, and it was like that whole amazing explosion of music had just sort of gone to nothing. So I just kept writing. I just sat in my bedroom and I was writing, and people were selling their gear really cheap because they were like, well, we can't release any stuff now, so we just sell it all off. So I bought myself an Akai sampler, a Roland sampler, and I bought them for like buttons, no money at all. Anyway, and I started getting some other gear. I think my first synth that I owned was a Juno 2 and stuff like that, and I'd just been paid from Formation Records and that, which wasn't a great deal, but bought me a couple of bits of gear, you know, and that was all I was interested. You know, whatever I got from the music went back into the music, plus whatever I could afford on top of that. So, you know, I'd always plough every single bit of my finances into music gear because I wanted to have a nice studio. So I got, you know, I started getting some really nice gear together. At the time, you know, the Akai, it was one of the early Akais. It wasn't the S1000 or anything flash. It was one of the early ones. But they're the ones that are sought after now because they've got the analogue filters and stuff like that. So, you know, and I used to do these filter steps with a snare drum and, you know, do some really interesting stuff like that, you know, which the S1000 couldn't come close to, you know. It didn't have that, you know, there was no sampling type on these old gear. And then we've got the Roland Era stuff, which is like a remake of the early XOX machines, like the 808, the 909, and then there was the TB303. There's a little sequencer there for some of my analog synths which are dotted around. Yeah, so I did some trance stuff, and like I said, it wasn't a cheesy trance you hear now. It was more progressive. It was more like techno. It was sort of a merge between techno and house. It was sort of the best elements, really nice rolling bass lines, and you know, and we did some of that stuff, and that was the end of the 90s. And I did a few remixes, which they went out on vinyl and stuff. I was never credited for, never paid for, and you know, the usual sort of routine with the, you know, the industry sort of being the industry that it is. You know, there's a one release and it says all tracks written by, and then there's this completely different name, and it's like, well, they used my track for the A side, you know. They used my track for the A side. It's like, what, you know? Yeah. So I thought, well, he's obviously the cooler looking guy, you know. So, you know, he's got all the latest, you know, Gucci clothes and stuff like that, and I just wasn't interested in that. I just wanted to make tunes. Again, there was no real releases. I was sitting there, I was writing music. I moved up to Scotland shortly after those releases, after those sort of trance remixes mainly. I was writing music again. I was still doing stuff, and I was sort of quite diverse because I'd sort of dipped into, you know, from my early youth I was really into electro. And I was really into drum and bass. Well, I was into the breakbeat. Then what became drum and bass, well, I'd written a hell of a lot of music. Got a whole load of these DATs. And this is what they are. Let's put that down. So they open like that, and then little tape. So yeah, these are your DATs. So everything was recorded on there. I've got loads and loads of those. I've got piles of them. And again, I was still writing a whole load of music, never got released. I did a few releases around 2006. The breakbeat scene that I was sort of in the early 90s re-emerged. It became sort of popular again. I think Prodigy even did an album with that sort of style, one of his more, it was about 2007. So I was doing the early set because my stuff was the slower stuff, because it was a bounce back of the early 90s. And yeah, so basically I had loads of labels asking for my stuff, because as soon as they found out that I was, you know, one of the artists from one of the old school artists on Formation Records and stuff, they were like, wow, you know, we want him, you know, want his stuff on, you know, want that sound, want him to make some more music. So I had a whole load of releases on various labels during that, and it was basically, the reason I sort of got into that was more that there was a lot of unfinished business. I'd written a hell of a lot of stuff after I'd left Formation, and even while I was on Formation, I was writing like a machine, you know. I was literally, you know, I could write a couple of tunes a week, and I just kept firing into these tunes. I was so into making music, and I had so much unfinished business. I was like, these tunes, you know, and when I used to play them to my friends, they were like, why is this not on vinyl? This is better than the stuff that you released, you know. So basically I just remixed them, brought the production up to date, and released them on these various labels. And then the next thing I found out that Street Sounds, which was the label that I collected all of these electro series from when I was a kid, had re-emerged, and that was this label here, and I got signed to this. I actually got 2 record deals in a week, one on this and one on this, and this is a German label. This is Dominance Electricity and Street Sounds, and I couldn't believe that, you know, I got a track on that label that was my childhood love. Anyway, next thing, the guy from Dominance got in touch with me and said, we're releasing this Global Surveyor Phase 3, it's 3 vinyl. They'd been collecting pieces over 3 or 4 years for this. The compilation is, you know, spans over sort of 3 years and is the absolute best stuff. And he wanted the track that I put 2 tracks up, so he wanted that. And I said, well, I did send it off to Street Sounds, but I've not heard back from them, so just go for it, just take it. Next thing, Street Sounds in the same week got in touch with me and said, I'm interested in your music, you know, I really like the track Solar Storm, which was the other one that I put up. So both tracks got signed, both tracks that I put up on this forum got signed, because I'd sort of kept in the shadows, you know, I sort of didn't put any music out at all, and then sort of quietly put these 2 tunes on this forum, and it all sort of blew up from there. Paul Hardcastle, who was had a massive electro track in the 80s, it was a #1 hit called 1985. He asked me to do the official 21st anniversary remix for it. So, you know, I just got signed to these, got that, and it was like, that's it, I've made it, you know. And then, as the music business is, it all sort of went, it didn't quite go as expected or as you'd think it would. So there wasn't really a great deal of money to be made or anything like that. So not that I'm into the money, but I just decided that, you know, to hell with releasing on various labels. I've got to say, Dominance Electricity is a good label to work for. I have to say that, because they are. And some of the others, there's these guys here. That's another release that I did, the new Electro 3. These guys, Analogue recordings, they're really good guys. Crowbot Crew, all the guys that I've worked with, absolutely brand new. You know, the underground guys are really the ones to work with, you know, and that's the biggest tip that I can give anybody breaking into the scene. Don't try and make your way onto EMI, because you won't ever be happy. You know, if you want to be happy, work with the underground guys, the independents, and because they feel their music a lot more. The underground records always sound better. You can feel there's passion in it, and that's what I'm about. You know, I'm more into the music than making money. So I thought, well, I'll just set up my own label, just release my own albums. So I've done a few albums, I've done a few ambient soundscapes, and just walking about the studio and sort of messing about with various synths and stuff, and recording it, sticking it up on YouTube. Gets loads of feedback, and I'll just put the recording up for, you know, the whole recording it for sale. So I put this 40-minute piece of me just messing about on gear, really ambient thing, just sort of flows along, and it's just like, wow, I've made more money out of that old thing than I did with Street Sounds, you know, which was the big label, you know. So it's like, you know, and then there's the albums, which really, you know, they've gone through the roof, you know, they're absolutely, you know, unbelievable, the amount that are sold. So yeah, that's sort of pretty much up to date. So it's just my own label, which is Lek Productions. I'm still available for bookings. I'll do live stuff and this and that, and yeah, and I should have an album out. I'm due to have a couple of albums out, because I'm sort of working simultaneously on another electro funk album, which is going to have some quite sort of, there'll be my usual melodic sort of music, and there'll also be some more hard edge stuff. But then simultaneously, I'm working on a really ambient album. So really, really chilled stuff, and that's a lot to do with what I've been building here, which is, you know, my other passion. So all this is homemade, and I've been sort of just experimenting and coming up with these really nice ambient soundscapes using, you know, totally obscure sort of sounds. You know, and building it yourself, you're always going to have sounds that no one else has got. So, so you know, it makes it exclusive, makes it interesting.